Welcome back, everyone. Airfix's 1600th HMS Repulse. I'm doing the May 1941 version out of Singapore. This is one of those ones, the tragically faded ship. Everyone should know about it. If they don't, I'll come back to that in a minute. But you can see I inherited this kit which had been messily attempted. I wouldn't say half-built, but definitely the hull had been started. The kit itself is from 1981, I think. So we're not talking anything modern or super detailed or anything like that. But you can see here it's a bit of a mess. I had it sitting in my stash after I got the box. I hadn't even opened it, but when I opened the box looking for something to do, I was a little bit annoyed, let's say, to see it left in that state for a number of reasons. Anyway, to get into it, the hull itself, I think it had been plastered with some probably primer, I'm guessing maybe Mr. Surfacer or one of those type. Anyway, it was a bit of a mess. There was still big hull seams, so just to almost get a start, and I think sometimes that's the hardest part. I decided to take on the hull, get some of the, the harder part out of the way, or maybe not even the harder part, just actually to make a start sometimes. So what I've done there is I'm using Humbrol filler, but I've thinned it with Mr. Surfacer so that I can get it to almost a thick paint consistency. Out of the tube, I find it difficult to use, but when I do it this way, it's pretty neat. If you've never seen the tape trick, that's always useful. It just saves making a big mess. That was one of those things which I did for years, and then when I saw someone doing it, I was like, oh, okay, not the sharpest tool in the shed all of the time. So you can see there, it really just makes cleanup pretty easy. It was quite a significant gap. I don't know if that is a tooling issue or the person who had it previously had struggled with it. Anyway, it was one of those ones that just seemed like a good place to start and to, just get into it a bit, I suppose. Sometimes that's always the hardest part, just that first step, as they say. At this point, it's easy enough to clean up. There was some dollops of primer and things that I had to sand my way through. Then I thought, not necessarily with any great plan, I'd just almost get it to at least a ship-looking colour. So I used a mixture or a home brew of some battleship grey that I experimented with a bit here and there until I got that bluish shade that really is used to a point where I was happy with. At first it was just a bit too yellow, but you can see there it's starting to look a bit better. I didn't necessarily expect this to be the finished paint, but what it did do is it almost brought it back to a point where I've got something that I could see I could work with. The moulding itself, or the plastic, it's a product of its age. It's not bad, but I'm not a fan of the Airfix plastic on the whole, especially in detail. It struggles. What I'm doing here is almost experimenting with some of the deck colouring. I think it was teak that they used in the day because of weather resistance, really. I think that was the main thing, and why there's not much teak left. But it was really a bit of trial and error on the painting. I know that there's lots of ways to go super detail on, say, doing that wood effect, and it's really quite remarkable to see what some of the dedicated shipbuilders can do with that. However, in this case, my main aim was really to get this kit back to at least a nice standard, or an appropriate standard. I'm a bit sensitive about Repulse and Prince of Wales. Again, I'm not quite sure if some of the gaps that I had encountered at this point were a tooling problem or the previous builder's problem. But either way, there was a bit of filling to come through, generally in awkward parts as well, because I did have to fiddle about to get some of this cleaned up. But again, it wasn't dramatic things, but maybe a little bit annoying. At this point, though, I feel like I've got something that I can work with. On Repulse itself, as I say, I do have probably a little bit more connection. Father was Navy, but I lived in Singapore for, almost 20 years, really. and I was quite familiar with a lot of the history of it in that sense. So, I know Keppel Harbour all the way and all the rest. Interestingly, I was just just earlier in the year, I was back at River Kwai. So I think for me, just being a bit familiar with the actual places, bit more sensitive or attuned to it in that sense, and they're really quite haunting photos that are floating around of the ships leaving Keppel Harbour. Interestingly, and since I'm diverting a little bit, it annoys me a bit because I often hear the comments about the fall of Singapore and it was a walkover and all of that. It was really savage fighting all the way down the Malay Peninsula, I think 6-8 weeks. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I'm getting a bit older and forget now, but it wasn't just the walk-in, people riding in on bicycles and things that is often sold. Even before I left Singapore, and it was quite common to find unexploded bombs on building sites and so on. Just behind Orchard Road, Mount Elizabeth, there was a zero-engine dug out of the ground on a building site. When would that have been? 2014 or something like that. So the whole island still has quite a lot of remnants of just how fierce the fighting was, all the way from Woodlands to Keppel Harbour. Yeah, it was still a good couple of weeks of basically street-to-street fighting. So it wasn't that walkover at all. The other interesting one, more relevant to this build, or the Repulse itself, is I often see those comments about, how silly they were to not have air support. But in one of those tragedies of fate, I think the behind the scenes of that, and again, people can correct me if I'm wrong, is Hermes had run aground in the Caribbean and it was supposed to provide air cover, but it was delayed 6 weeks, so didn't make it out to the Far East. And as they say, the rest is a really quite tragic history of what happened there. And just to add the last bit, I think it was RM Royal Marines and Argyll and Sutherland is really, well, along with the Malay regiments, absolutely, that really fought their way right down back into Singapore. So, yeah, just one of my little rants, I suppose, on the topic. As I say, I know Singapore very well and spent a lot of time in Malaysia and the whole region. Anyway, the ship itself, it goes together reasonably well. I think, again, you just got to accept that it's not going to be as good on the whole as modern kits, and even some of the modern kits are not that good, and I've done some older kits that are still excellent. So what I'm doing here is the hull red. I had a specific hull red in the Mr. Colour, but I found it too brown. So what I did do is I basically spiked it a bit with some red to give what I think was more of a hull red. I guess that's a subjective thing, or that lead red. You can see here that's starting to look a bit more ship shape, as they say. And the other thing, I'm not really masking much at this point because I was really, that first, say, coat of battleship grey and even some of the deck colour, it was as much just to get it back to looking like a ship. So that's the mixture I used. I can't say what parts or percentages or anything like that. I eyeball it. What I'm doing now is I need to do the waterline mark. I'll be starting to do that on top of that grey. So, yeah, it was a bit of experimenting. The superstructure is nice enough. I reiterate, you don't get the super detail, but it is what it is. You can see here I've got it all lined up and I'm practicing on the paper before I'll come through. That way I tend to avoid any screw-ups, to be honest. Occasionally I'll get my mix wrong, even though I do it all the time. I'll still mess things up. And I'm just coming along doing the black line, that watermark that goes along, I think, ships. There's nothing really tricky about that. I think just masking, you get experience with it. If you're or if it's a more curve, or what I'd say a compound curve, then one good trick is to come across with a clear coat first. That'll help seal it. What I also do is I'll start lightly, very almost holding the airbrush further away so it doesn't run, and then that also can provide a seal on the tape edges. So as I've got to that point, I'm coming back, and now it's getting really into fair bit of detail work. I'm coming through and doing essentially hand brushing the black decks. I'm not sure, but someone can probably correct me if I'm wrong. Even modern ships, I think it's asphalt. You go on modern warships and so on. I've never really thought about it too much until now, but yeah, I think it's just asphalt. Again, let me know in the comments. Always like hearing from people, and especially if I'm wrong, do let me know. I'm also doing a bit of dilute coats as well here and there, and another one that I did do, or I do this even on my plain builds, is where I'll use a dilute or watered down paint and try and let that run into what I'd say really narrow areas rather than trying to brush everything. So this is the masking coming off, and at this point, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it's all come together. We're getting to really quite a dramatic makeover in that sense. And like I said, it just annoyed me seeing Repulse like that in the box. And I'm so tempted to start ranting about what's actually happened off the coast there in the last couple of years. But back to the ship, focus. I'm trying to focus. Yeah, so at this point, I'm really quite happy with the big turnaround, let's say. The superstructure is nice. It's not that you're going to get any super detail, but you can see here from a distance on a shelf, and it's on the shelf in the living room. For me, it's a nice finished model, if that makes sense. If you're getting into close-ups and everything, yeah, you can see the limitations, let's say, but as it goes, especially compared to where it was just sitting as a mess in the box like that, yeah, it's a huge difference. The guns, like I said, the deck was already glued down. There's pins that were supposed to come up through the deck. That wasn't done, so I made the best of it. Here's the little swordfish. I always assumed they were swordfish, but it could be something else. Again, let me know if I've messed that up. It's really a lot of hand brushing, and after all the planes I've been doing recently, that's been a nice change as well, just to get a bit more hand brushing. I have a lot in the stash, and I've almost got a phobia at this point about doing canopies, so occasionally it's a nice change. The other thing that in the stash, which is probably relevant, is I've acquired, let's say, an eclectic mix, because one thing since I started the YouTube channel is friends and family for birthdays will give me kits. Interestingly though, the missus didn't give me a birthday present this year, and I was like, what's going on? And I got told, well, I bought you a kit last year and you still haven't built it. So expect to see a Tamiya Porsche at some point, because I'm still in trouble over that one and I never even realised. But the point is, yeah, I do have a lot of other kits that I do hope to get through. And at this point, yeah, I'm just doing what I feel like to a degree. Predominantly, I still do mostly planes, but I do have a few ships there. Interestingly, I really probably would like to do a nice version of Repulse. I've got a good one in the stash that I think my son gave me the other year for birthday or Christmas, so at some point that'll have to be done. And there's some crazy stuff in there. Here's an interesting one, the Tamiya hand drill. You buy this as a kit if you don't know. I can't remember what it cost. Maybe $30, $40 when I bought it. For most stuff, I don't use it. I still just use a pin vise, but I did use it here, and when even on other kits, when I've got a lot of holes to drill, it's really useful. The other thing I do with it sometimes is I'll put a cotton bud or a Q-tip, whatever you want to call it, into the chuck, and I can use it for polishing. I'm not drilling through the portholes here. I'm just doing it, 16th of an inch or millimetre or something. And what it's doing, it just gives that little bit of extra depth and detail. On a kit like this, I think there's always that trade-off between trying to go super detail on something where the foundation doesn't warrant it. But at the same time, it wasn't a big deal, and it was almost therapeutic sitting there drilling each of those portholes. It wasn't a problem, let's say. So at this point, you can see I'm really just coming in and doing a lot of the finer detailing work, bits of mist, and I think also trying to break up solid colours, which sounds a bit artistic and flamboyant, let's say. But one problem I do think, and I've done this myself, especially when I was younger, is ships tend to be grey and a Spitfire is green and brown and so on. I think having that variation, even where you'd think there's a solid colour, does make a big difference. So there's more of this asphalt, again, I assume, material. I just come in with, like you can see there, some black. One thing I do in relation to that though is I'll use almost different thinness. I don't know how to describe that, but that gives it just a little bit more variation compared to just solid pitch black. So I'll dilute blacks and so on to varying degrees. And yeah, at this point you can see here I'm just adding funnel soot and so on. One limitation I do think, like I say, I'm never really a big fan of Airfix plastic, but on fine parts like masting and so on, it can be too soft, too brittle, so you will get breakages. Even on the swordfish I did the other day, a biplane, I had that problem with, say, struts and things like that. But yeah, it can be a problem, and it just doesn't seem to have the strength that, say, the gunnery director's tower and things like that really do need. Again, a lot of just hand brushing at this point. It's almost therapeutic. I do tend to work from lacquers as the base coat, and then I'll come across with, say, like in this case, Tamiya, which is an alcohol acrylic. And then the very fine detail, even on all my builds, I'll come in with water-based acrylics. The reason for that is you don't disturb the underlying layers. And as I make mistakes, which I normally do, and it's really quite an easy cleanup, especially if you're quick, a cotton bud or a bit of paper towel, and it can be fixed within seconds. You don't notice you messed up. So yeah, you can see I'm kind of taking my time at this point, and that also gives you a good view of, I suppose, the limited detail of the plastic. The guns and things like that are especially really pretty coarse, but again, as mentioned, when it's up on a shelf and or at least you're not staring at it close up like this, it's not a huge problem. It's been a nice kit, and I'm pleased that it's no longer sitting there looking shitty in the box like it was. So there, it's really nice finished kit given where it started. It's one of those ones, I haven't seen any other HMS Repulse Airfix videos on YouTube, so there you go. If you do see it, it's worth doing. Definitely that hull, I feel pleased just seeing that compared to where it was. And I'll leave it there. I do hope you've enjoyed that. Obviously, let me know what you think in the comments, and like and subscribe, all the usual things. I do like hearing from you, and especially if I've got any of the facts wrong on that. It's an important one, and I think it's worth correcting me and letting people know. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I'll see you in the next one, which is a swordfish. Thank you again for watching. Bye for now.